wickedness came into the world with the firstborn of woman, Cain, the oldest son of Adam. When God bestowed paradise upon the first pair of mankind, he warned them particularly against carnal intercourse with each other. But after the fall of Eve, Satan, in the guise of the serpent, approached her, and the fruit of their union was Cain, the ancestor of all the impious generations that were rebellious towards God and rose up against him. Cain's descent from Satan, who is the angel Samael, was revealed in his seraphic appearance. At his birth, the exclamation was wrung from Eve, "I've gotten a man through an angel of the Lord." Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio, and I'm honored and glad to be back. And I have as guest with me this evening our good friend, Rob Skiba. Rob, are you there, brother?
I am. Good to be back.
Yeah, I'm glad to be home and back to the normal routine and getting back to some of the work that I haven't been able to really focus on because of other other obligations. But how about yourself, man? I know that you've got exciting news about Seed, and also wanted to touch base on the past conference and everything.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for a Seed update, it's been a very exciting week for me. Actually, it started during the conference this past weekend. I was receiving regular updates from the production studio in South Africa. Again, I want to say a big shout out and a huge thank you to supporters, everybody that has made this possible. We couldn't do it without you. You know who you are. Thank you so much for your support. We are making really good progress. They were sending me CGI models that they're building and environments, and they actually used government-supplied topographical data to recreate the Solomon Islands authentically to look just like the real deal, like to be accurate. And working on the interior and the exterior of the Avenger plane, and setting up the sunset scenes and how the lighting's going to work and all that. And did some casting this week. I haven't settled on anybody yet, but did like a live Skype with several actors. I think it was a Monday or Tuesday, and feel like I got maybe two of them. Maybe two people are ready for the roles of Catalano, the tail gunner, and Thompson, the radio man. So still need to do some more auditions for the lead for Lieutenant Kane, and the Japanese actors, of course, still need to be done as well. But a lot of good movement there. The comic book artwork is done. I still have a little bit more of lettering to do. Landed a pretty good deal for printing. And so hopefully if I can finish the lettering on that tomorrow, then I can probably submit the order, if not tomorrow, or early next week, to have the first issue of the comic book done. So lots of really good movement. And the composer sent me a working draft of the music. And the guy that's being like my line producer out there, his name is Johan. He's the one assembling the team. He said, I've worked with Hans Zimmer. I've worked with some of the biggest composers in the industry. And this kid that he was referring me to, he said he's every bit as good as those guys. And he's a young guy. Didn't hear any of his music. Just got a chance to talk with him briefly. I said, okay, well, I sent him a link to the TV series Arrow, for the music to the TV series Arrow. I said, this is the type of music that I want. And that was about it. And I got a sample of the working draft of the music for the first half of the teaser that we're doing. And right about 1:50 into it, the beginning was really cool, it was intriguing, but about 1 minute 50 seconds into it, the music changes gears, and that's when the Japanese Zeros start diving toward our heroes. And man, it was like a goosebump, almost tear moment for me. Nice. Like it just went right through me. I'm like, oh, this dude just nailed it. Like perfect. I'm like, oh man, I'm so happy. And they sent me sound design. They're starting to work on the sound design on it too. It's surround sound immersive. So very happy with the direction all that's going. So I am flying high over here on Seed. Things are going really well, and I'm getting ready for my trip to South Africa. I leave on the 6th of December. So lots of exciting stuff going on there. And of course, this conference, man, Wow, what a great conference Robbie Davidson put on this past weekend. The fourth Flat Earth International Conference. It was the third in the States. They did one in Canada. But it went really well. I'm going to get your take on it, and I'll share a little bit of my thoughts on it. How did it go for you?
Yeah, well, for me, it's like coming together with family. There's that whole reunion vibe, and it gives all of us that, because we're all doing so much in the different spaces that we're all working in, and certainly whereas a lot of people are fully dedicated to flat earth and topic, you and I, we cover and work in a lot of other topics and issues, and so but it is a blessing to come together and to see what the community is doing and what people are involved in, and to be able to really share time and space, break bread, and conversation with others is that's a really awesome part of the gatherings and the conventions. I really like that aspect of it. Getting a chance to see you and Sheila and others, it's always a blessing. And I had seen on a Facebook post that an individual had really blessed you with an awesome gift as well. So can you make mention of that?
Yeah, maybe I'll grab it during one of the breaks. It's this guy. He had a replica of the 1611 King James Bible, the original 80-book Bible, and it's like, I don't know, 6 inches thick and really big. I mean, the thing is huge, and it weighs easily 30 pounds. And he was over there showing people it, and it's got all the ornate drawings and whatnot inside it. And I just walked over to go check it out. I'm looking at it. He goes, "You know what, brother? I brought this for you." I'm like, "What?"
Wow.
He said, "I want to give it to you. It's $1,000 book. It was I guess like a limited collector's edition for the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible." So now anybody in the King James only crowd that wants to get, come after me, my sword's bigger than yours. I can pretty much guarantee it. But yeah, what a tremendous blessing that was. Really amazing gift. And I mean, just everybody there was so amazing. I mean, we had, like you said, it's like reuniting with family. Of course, got to hang out with you and everybody that was manning your table. The Zen Garcia Mall over there.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we had a really good time. I'm only now beginning to watch the presentations. Of course, whenever I do a conference, it's
right.
Almost impossible to catch anybody else because so many people want to talk to you and stuff. But
yes,
I've watched about 3 or 4 other presentations so far, and it's been really good. I think everybody had a really good time. A little bit of drama behind the scenes that I tried to stay out of. So
me too.
I think most of that was transparent to the audience, and that's the best thing. If they think everything went great, then it's a success, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it was really good. Robbie's moving on. He posted something on his Facebook page a couple days ago saying, you know what, this was the last one that he's going to do. And sort of passing the baton. And there's already people within the community gathering together right now, probably as we speak, coming up with plans for next year. Got some new things in the works from what I hear that sound pretty excited. I'll probably keep it quiet until I know for sure what's going to happen, but it looks like some exciting stuff lining up for next year. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, good time.
Well, that's good that somebody is stepping in to assume that role. And I can imagine if I were, like Robbie, and having to dedicate a lot of time and space to it, I would certainly want to pass the baton too. It seems like a lot, and I know that he had, a tough time this past year with the passing of his father, and so to regather his focus on family and some of his own projects, I think that would be an awesome blessing for him as well.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what he comes up with next. I know that he's become a lot more intrigued with the Sabbath and the feasts and wanting to go a lot deeper. He has my Torah study workbook, so he said he's going to start looking into all that. So, maybe it's just a much needed break for him. Maybe he's getting ready to do a whole new endeavor. I don't know. Wish him well. Either way, what he's going to do, and I'm sure he'll still be involved in future conferences. If maybe as a speaker or something.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Nothing else, but
right.
Yeah, real excited, and I'm excited to jump back into our study.
Yeah, me too.
Sure, you probably heard it at the conference. I heard a lot of people came up to me at the conference and said they're really enjoying this series. So a lot of feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a huge blessing. I'm glad that people are opening themselves to other aspects of the work that we do, and even though the focus initially was on the biblical cosmology, especially on the first 4 days of the creation week, moving into the other aspects like the fall of humanity and the serpent seed and things of that nature. They're still listening in and wanting to tune in for as far as we go into Genesis and reaching Genesis 6 pretty soon, moving and transitioning into the Book of Enoch. I think a lot of people will be really blessed by all of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think we left off in Genesis 4, verse 16, if memory serves.
One question, though, before we go into it.
Okay.
Since this has connection to your seed project and what you were working on, I wanted to ask you if you had ever heard of a book called The Solomon Islands Mysteries.
I think I actually have that book.
Okay.
That's what inspired it.
Yeah. Okay, right on.
I'm looking behind me here. Yep, I have it. Yep. I remember looking at it a long time ago. I couldn't remember for sure if I have it, but yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, that's what when I read that, and it's really exciting to me too, is this movie Midway is in the theater right now. It was released for Veterans Day. Wow, what a powerful movie that was. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but man, I saw it. Yeah, I saw it on IMAX big screen. I didn't see it in 3D, but it was like IMAX big screen. So, and I was sitting fairly close to the front, so most of my peripheral vision was taken up by the screen. And wow, I mean, you feel like you're in the cockpit of those planes dive bombing the aircraft carriers and stuff. I mean, it's really intense. But what excites me is they're setting the stage perfectly for what I'm doing, because their movie starts with Pearl Harbor, which is December 41, and goes to Midway, which was June or July, I forget, 42. And my story takes place at the end of January 42. So about 40-ish minutes into the movie is when my story takes place. So, yeah, super excited about that. And when I went back to the story after 4 years of this research, or at that time was, I guess, about 2 years into this research, enclosed world cosmology, I had to completely redo everything. Like, I was like, okay,
right.
The whole outline that I had, like, scrap that, start over, and significant rewrites to the scripts that I had done, which ultimately turned out to be really good. In my opinion, a good thing for me to do. And I was looking, because what I had for a teaser, the opening, teaser before the opening title credits, was cool, and I needed something new. And I was always intrigued by what some say is going on in the Solomon Islands.
Yeah,
I thought, okay, that's an interesting place to start, and like what I ended up writing came to me like instantly. I didn't have to think about it. It was just okay, there we go.
Nice.
But some people have already expressed interest in it, knowing more and telling me more. So I'm excited that once I put it out to see what happens. Who knows what out there, that can contribute to the narrative.
Right. Yeah. We actually we have a lady that is an author. Her name is Nancy Quayle, and she lives in the Solomon Islands.
Oh wow.
And yeah, she published a book through us called In the Beginning, but her second, because I had made mention, and for those that don't know, The Solomon Island Mysteries is a book by Marius Boranian, and he had married a native, a chieftain's daughter there in the Solomon Islands, that became privy to knowledge of the mythology and also even what has been ongoing And there is story that the giants are still in existence and still living there on the island, and that they had been cannibalizing for generations the people, the indigenous peoples there on the island, and were at war with them and lived in the interior of the island, and also had UFO phenomenon where these craft were seen and called and references dragons, and that they would enter into the lakes and into the waterfalls and descend down into the depths of the island, and were regularly seen by all the natives that lived there. And so this individual, once he moved there after marrying this woman, became knowledgeable and gathered together all of these stories and published them in this book. And so I do recommend that people check it out. But it connects to Rob's story on Seed, because it speaks about how the Japanese, when they settled on the island, and the Americans, when they had their confrontation in the Pacific Islands, that the Solomon Islands were avoided because of the presence of these red-haired cannibal giants. And it was known that they were alive during the time of World War II there upon the island. And so, I definitely think that people should check it out. And yeah, you couldn't have picked a better story to open your series and to begin, the whole storyline. So,
yeah. You. Now you got me intrigued again. I put it up on the screen for people who are watching on YouTube. They can check it out. It's available on Amazon for like $17. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if it was Steve Quayle I ended up buying the book because I heard about it.
Yeah.
I'd heard some of the stories that you just mentioned. But I've never read it. So now I'm pulling it out. Okay. It's probably a good idea to go in a lot deeper into reading this, especially after what you just said.
Oh yeah, I definitely think you should check it out and read it. But what I was saying about the lady that lives there is that she had agreed to do a book, her next book, on, the giants and the mythology of that island. And because, her people and her family lived there, and she's deeply immersed in the culture there. And so it will be interesting to see what she comes up with. And, if she can find out anything further as to what is revealed within this particular book. But certainly, I believe it's a must read for anybody that's intrigued in the whole Genesis 6, the Nephilim story, and the giants that came about from that unholy copulation. And certainly we'll be getting to that within probably in a couple shows, depending on how far we move with this. But yeah, let's get into it.
There was another book I wonder if you were familiar with, called The Suppressed History of America, The Murder of Meriwether Lewis, and the Mysterious Discoveries of the Lewis and Clark Expedition. Have you heard that book?
No, I have not.
Yeah, it's another good one. It's available for $10 on Amazon. I got it up on the screen for those watching on YouTube. Lewis and Clark, of course, we're all familiar with our history here in the United States. In fact, one of the first jobs I ever had was working at a drugstore that was called Lewis and Clark Drugstore, and they had like this sort of caricatures of Lewis and Clark. Was sort of their logo, but I forget now the exact narrative, how they went west, and I think it was beyond the Ohio River. I think it was Lewis went north and Clark went south. It could be the other way around, whatever, but they split up and they did their own thing, and then they came back together again. And apparently Lewis wrote rather extensively about encountering giants.
Wow, that's awesome.
That he took, and the Smithsonian Institution was created because of that, actually by somebody in Europe. It wasn't even created by anyone in the United States, and specifically to cover up that evidence. And of course, we've all heard stories about how the Smithsonian, the Vatican, and organizations like that come in there, and anytime somebody digs up skeletal remains or anything like that, it's confiscated and whatnot. And then he ends up
lost.
dead. And it was that Lewis, supposedly was a suicide, but this guy was like, he was like Rambo. I mean, he was a very skilled infantryman, in the army. And I forget all the details, but when you see how this guy died, that's not how a soldier would kill himself.
Very suspicious.
Yeah, very, very suspicious. But yeah, another one of those interesting books, The Suppressed History of America, The Murder of Meriwether Lewis, and the Mysterious Discoveries of the Lewis and Clark Expedition. Definitely.
Yeah, one final comment before moving on. For those that don't know, there is extensive mythologies and legends and stories shared by the indigenous peoples of the cannibal giants that were dominant and lived here, and that were the ones that had established a lot of these giant mound structures all over the United States. And that when the Europeans, landed in Plymouth and the Mayflower and all that, and they started to excavate and to settle the land and to level it, to farm it and to also cultivate it, that they encountered and dug up numerous giant skeletons of very large proportion, or not just 7, 8 feet, 10 feet, but 16 feet, 20 feet, some with horns. Many, there were also Hebrew writings discovered with them, and armor and all kind of strange anomalies. So, and this history has been hidden and forgotten and forbidden as well. But there's the story of Sarah Willameka, who was the Paiute princess, and she wrote about her people's encounters and how they had killed the giants in Lovelock Cave there in Nevada. That her people and all the native tribes, they got tired of being picked off and cannibalized by these giants, and so united and went to war against them and ended up killing them, massacring them in the Lovelock Caves there. So a lot of connections, a lot of intriguing tales and stories, and certainly a lot of people are not familiar with and never have heard about these kind of accounts. But I know you mentioned Steve Quell, and he wrote the story of the Long Walkers, the book on the Long Walkers, and he shares and covers a lot of those ancient narratives by speaking to the native peoples and here in America and abroad, and bringing to life a lot of those legends. So very intriguing stuff when you examine and look into it, and especially with its connections to the Bible, because again, it's just affirming the Bible as the inerrant word of the Most High God, who established and created all things.
Another good book along the lines of what you just talked about is The Ancient Giants Who Ruled America, The Missing Skeletons and the Great Smithsonian Cover-Up by Rich Dewhurst, and Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds, and the Smithsonian Files. I mean, this is the thing, man. There are people out there who want to dismiss the Book of Enoch and, the stuff that we're talking about here. And you literally have to ignore mountains of information and mountains of bones, mountains of bones. I mean, to deny the angelic view of Genesis 6 is to ignore vast amounts of historical documentation, recovered bones, discovered bones, ancient stories, myths, legends. I mean, it's massive, the amount of stuff you have to just completely ignore to hold to the Sethite view.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just, the ancient narratives and manuscripts and texts that make up both the canonical and the extra-biblical compilations, but also, as you said, the archaeological, all the mounds and all of the megalithic sites and structures that not only here in America, but abroad, everywhere. The presence of the giants, even now in the Solomon Islands, it's said that the giants are still alive. You have also talked about, and others, the Kandahar, how the special forces reported encountering a giant in Afghanistan. And so, I mean, yeah, if you really open yourself to what the Bible is revealing, truth is undeniable in connection to all of what it is amounting evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we've got just a few seconds here before the first break, so we'll pick it up on the other side. But we thank everybody again for joining us. It's always exciting sharing and fellowshipping and discussing all the revelations contained within the Word. And wow, the truths that are conveyed. It's absolutely mind-blowing. We'll be right back, everyone, for a second portion. All right, welcome back, everybody. All right, Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you, brother. We'll start with the King James, and I'll follow up with the Targum, and then we'll go into discussion.
All right, sounds good. And if memory serves, the last verse we covered was chapter 4, verse 16. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. Don't know if you wanted to hit on anything there before I continued.
No, go ahead.
No?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go starting in verse 17 then. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. And unto Enoch was born Arad, and Arad begat Mahujael, and Mahujael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal, and he was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer, not sure how you pronounce that, in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God said, she, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Boy, there's a lot to talk about here. I don't know if we're going to get to chapter 5.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there is a lot. And there's other things that I want to bring up as we talk about this. But I'll follow up with the Targum, and then we'll go into discussion on this.
Yeah.
And Cain went out from before the Lord and dwelt in the land of exile and wandering, eastward of the Garden of Eden. It had been before Cain slew Abel his brother that the earth multiplied fruits as the fruits of the Garden of Eden. But from the time that he sinned and killed his brother, it changed to produce thorns and thistles. And there was born unto Enoch Irad, and Irad begat Mahushael, and Mahushael begat Methusael, and Methusael begat Lamech, and Lamech took to him 2 wives. The name of the first Ada, and the name of the second Zillah. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the chief rab of all those who dwell in tents, and are masters of cattle. And the name of his brother was Juval. He was chief rab of all those who take part in song with the lyre and the pipe. And Zillah bare also Tubal-Cain, the chief rab of all artificers who know the workmanship of brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. She was the mistress of elegies and songs. And Lamech said to his wives Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech. Hearken to my words, for I have not killed a man that I should be slain for him, neither have I destroyed a young man on whose account my children should perish. For Cain, who sinned and was converted by repentance, had protection unto 7 generations extended to him, and to Lamech the son of his son, who hath not sinned, it is just that it shall be extended unto 70 and 7. And Adam knew his wife again at the end of 130 years after Abel had been slain. And she bare a son, and called his name Sheth. For she said, The Lord hath given me another son instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. And to Sheth also was born a son, and he called his name Enosh. That was the generation in whose days they began to err, and to make themselves idols, and surnamed their idols by the name of the word of the Lord. Wanted to really quickly, as far as for people that don't know the reasoning as to why it is that Lamech took 2 wives, by this particular time, it's also revealed in the Book of Enoch that they taught men how to kill the seed in the womb. And so what they did is they took 2 wives, they took one to bear children, and they took and kept one for pleasure. And that particular wife they did not have children with. And of course, the children of Cain mixed even with their daughters, as is mentioned in other passages and other books, but that sexually they were corrupted and they were involved in all sorts of different abomination. But this is also as far as the backdrop of the story of the 2 wives, and it's shared in greater detail in one particular book called The Writings of Abraham, but also in the book of Jasher, which is an interesting text. It makes mention of the story of Lamech killing Cain, and how because he was blind, he had gone hunting with Tubal-Cain, his grandson. And where it makes mention here of killing a man and then killing a young man, this was actually fulfilled, that Cain was given reprieve for 7 generations. In the book of Jasher, it speaks of the mark of Cain as being a horn, and that he looked like an animal. And so Tubal-Cain had pointed him out to Lamech, who shot an arrow and with a bow had slain him. And then wandering up to him and feeling to see what he had killed, he realized because of the horn that it was Cain, according to the text anyways, that it was Cain, his ancestor. And in angst, he had clapped his hands to such a degree and with such fury that he accidentally killed Tubal-Cain, his grandson. And so, being blind, he had nobody to lead him back to where his wives were. And that's why in the story, his wives come looking for him and find him there. And then he tells the story to them of the curses, the generations, and how because he had slain Cain, that his children and generations would be condemned 77 times over in curses. And so they did lead him back, but they separated themselves from him for a time, according to some of the stories, and then they made up, and Lamech was taken care of by his wives afterwards. But that's the fullness of the story. And so if there's anything else that you wanted to bring up in there, certainly, I'll pass you the baton.
Yeah, no, you covered that quite well. I was going to bring up some of the things that was in the book of Jasher. And it's one of the things I love about Jasher is, look, I don't need to argue whether it should or should not be considered canon. I'm not aware of anybody in history that ever did consider it canon. It's just been viewed as sort of an authoritative commentary, much like we might refer to the works of Josephus, for example. He didn't write scripture, but he elaborated on things in scripture that help us understand scripture better. So it appears to me that Jasher was held in very similar regard. by the Hebrews, never considered to be scripture. And there's actually a couple of books I have here. I have the Ancient Book of Jasher, published by Dr. Ken Johnson, and the Book of Jasher, published by Joseph B. Lumpkin. And in both of these cases, they make a really good case for the authenticity of this book. People want to say that, Jasher is something we shouldn't pay much attention to. They say it's a medieval forgery. But both of these guys actually trace this particular version of Jasher. I guess there's a couple of versions out there. But the version that I have, and that I've also published myself, the English version was taken from the version of Jasher that can be traced back at least as far back as to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So I understand the story. There was like a scribe that had a library of scrolls, and Jasher being one of them. He hid himself away between the walls in somewhere inside the temple, and when the Romans were destroying everything, a Roman soldier found him hiding there, took him to be a slave for him, back to Spain, Sevilla, Spain, if memory serves. And it was there that many centuries later that manuscript was recovered, then of course later translated into English, the English we have now. Now, if we could trace it back to 70 AD, some say that that particular version actually goes back to about at least 200 BC, and around the time of Ptolemy, that after Alexander the Great died, and his four generals kind of split the empire, whatnot. Ptolemy had this peculiar people called the Israelites, the Hebrews, and all of the people that each of these generals were to oversee, they wanted to know what they wanted to know about their religion, their gods, their culture, etc. So they wanted to know, what are your religious books? And the Hebrews didn't want to give this pagan their Torah, so they handed him Jasher. And he read it, was intrigued by it, and then found out that they were holding out on him, and then demanded, no, you got to write to me this Torah of Moshe, your teacher. And so it was because of the book of Jasher, incidentally, that the Septuagint was written. So
fascinating.
Yeah, they talk about this history, both of them, in their commentary on the book of Jasher. So I believe it's authentic. Does it have errors? Sure, but it was never considered to be scripture, nor should we treat it as such. So you might come into some scribal errors when it comes to ages or dates or things of that nature, but the overall narrative itself seems to be intact, and it's also supported by various Jewish midrash. We would say Jewish commentary. Dating from BC right into, several hundred years AD. So when you read like Ginsburg's Legends of the Jews and various rabbinic midrash commentaries, right, things of that nature, they seem to, there's a common source, whether it's the book of Jasher that they're drawing from, or, I don't know, but it's sort of like the Q manuscript that they say the four gospels are based off of, right? That there's perhaps a missing document that the Gospels were based on. I don't know. That's what people say. So for me, I'm like, well, it appears to retain the essence, at the very least, of the stories that were very familiar to those who wrote commentary in the earliest years after Christ, and even in some cases before Christ. So, and then when you have apostles, and writers in the New Testament, like Paul, mentioning it and talking about Jannes and Jambres, the individuals that opposed Moses and Pharaoh's court, there's no precedence for that anywhere in the canonized text. But Jasher mentions those two by name, so it shows that Paul was familiar with the book of Jasher. Uh-huh. So, and when you compare things in the Jasher account with like the Testament of the Patriarchs and things like that, you see a lot of parallels. So, right, I like it. Sheila says it's like a, Sheila likes to compare the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jasher by saying like Enoch is like a guy blockbuster Avengers type of book, and Jasher's the chick flick book. It's got some adventure in it, but it focuses on the details of the people's lives. Yeah. I mean, like something like in the version that I published, in the format that I have, it's something like 200 pages just on Abraham.
Right.
We get very little by comparison in the, let's say, the King James or the
Yes.
canonized text. We get what we need to know about the father of our faith. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so forth. We get the Cliff Note bullet points of the Cliff Notes, snapshot, but you get a whole lot more in the book of Jasher. Yeah. Now, the thing that may throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in this for me is the current work of Doug Woodward, he's got a book called Rebooting the Bible, right. And he's looking at the Septuagint, the difference between the Masoretic-based texts and some of the older texts, and saying that the timeline's like vastly different. So for me, a guy who loves timelines, I'm very comfortable with the King James, Bishop Ussher, that whole Jasher paradigm. All the dates line up well in my mind, but they get thrown off quite significantly, as we'll see in chapter 5 when we go through the various, not chapter 5 so much as after the flood, but anyway, lineages in the King James versus lineages in the Septuagint vary. Now, with all that said, one of the things that jumped out at me is it took them 130 years to decide to have another child.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I don't know, for Eve to have been the first woman, and I'm going to say she's probably pretty hot. How Adam went 130 years, or they had some kind of birth control or something, I don't know. That seems rather interesting to me. But we see in the millennial reign that I think it's in Isaiah 65, if I'm not mistaken. It talks about if a person dies at 100, he's considered to be a child. So perhaps then, if you're living to be almost 1,000 years of age, then there may be 100+ years of adolescence, going on. They were mature enough, obviously, to have Cain and Abel.
Right.
I struggle to see why it would take them 100 years plus to decide to have another one, but that's what it says.
Yeah. In some of the story, with regard to the book of Jasher, the Ethiopians, they do have it as part of their canon. But I do, I enjoy reading the book of Jasher because of the parallel account, as far as it follows and affirms, and also brings great detail, like the Targum, to a lot of the stories in the King James, which are a little more ambiguous and a little less distinct with as far as elaboration. And so, yeah, I like the details. I'm the kind of person that reads all of the different accounts, the legends of the Jews, the Perky Rabbi Eleazar, the Chronicles of Jeremiah. I read everything so that I can learn more. But yeah, with regard to the stories of Abraham, and even the great detail of the war between the children of Jacob and Esau in the book of Jasher, there's like chapters and chapters and chapters detailing all of this, but you don't find it in great elaboration again in the King James. And so for those that, and especially in my study of the bloodlines, and the distinction between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, you see that very much preserved in great detail again between the wars of especially Jacob and Esau and their children, as presented within the book of Jasher. But with regard to other stories, examining and looking at all these other texts, in my mind, in doing so, we get better understanding on things that are not stated, like even Nimrod, and how he had put Abraham through the fire and passed him even before Daniel and his two buddies, that passing him through the fire, that Abraham had to undergone that same type of thing, and that the star of Bethlehem was seen in the skies during his birth as well. And so he's a type and a shadow for the coming of Christ. And so all these different stories are beautiful for people that like the extra detail, even like I had made mention of the revelation of the Magi and the prophecies, the first book of Adam and Eve, all of those stories. Yeah, I love reading it all because it just adds and enriches all the details of the biblical narrative, and
Yeah.
especially with like serpent seed and other things.
Oh, for sure. Now Joshua doesn't get into that.
No,
And actually Joshua doesn't even really get into the angel narrative either.
right.
And that's what impressed me to publish the book Genesis and the Synchronized Biblically Endorsed Extra Biblical Text. It's a mouthful there, but because it seemed like each of those books, Genesis, starting with Genesis as the foundation, and I have it published as Genesis in the King James and Septuagint side by side because there are notable differences, so you can compare those. And the entire volume of Enoch, Jasher, and Jubilees also. So you can kind of like use all of those four books, Genesis, Enoch, Jasher, and Jubilees, to like it's almost like each one fills in the blank where one left off. It's like you read it, and we'll get to it in chapter 5, but where Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. That's all we get. Like what? Well, I think it's Joshua chapter 3. I think it's 3 of Joshua. The whole chapter explains why Enoch was considered worthy to be taken. And so it's like, it's, we may actually, maybe we should do that is when we get to Genesis 6, pause, read Joshua, the first 3 chapters.
Yes.
And then read Enoch.
That's a good idea.
Because Joshua 3 tells you what Enoch did to be so favored by God. And he's, basically got to the point where he was spending, the majority of his time with God and not with man. And finally, God's like, okay, you're closer to my house than your house. Why don't you just come home with me? Right.
Right.
But in the meantime, it's like, what's he doing with God? Okay, now let's go read the Book of Enoch. And we see that, he's basically being more or less hired by the fallen angels to be the fallen angels of Genesis 6, I should say. Let me clarify that. The watchers of Genesis 6 to be their attorney in that whole scenario. And he's also being shown various things in heaven and all that kind of stuff, which he then later relays to his son, Methuselah. And then he's taken. Then we come back and get back on track with the other. And Jubilees fills in some other blanks. And so where Enoch or Joshua tells you in great detail what made Enoch worthy, Enoch tells you in great detail where he went, what he did when he was there.
Right.
And Jubilees fills in some of the gaps as well. So I find them all very valuable resources to be looking at the same time. And there's another book that I always recommend to people. I have it right here. It's a Dictionary of Scripture Proper Names by J.B. Jackson. It's a really short, small little book that's just the names of the people in the Bible and their corresponding meanings. Well, it's also available online. I'll put let me copy the link into the chat room on YouTube here, and I'll put it in the chat room for you if you're not already aware of it, Zen.
Yeah, I actually bought it when you mentioned it to me a long
Well,
time
there's an
ago.
online one that makes it easy to search.
Oh,
so
very cool.
I just posted it into our Skype chat.
Okay, great.
So you should see it there. And while you were reading earlier, I went and looked up the names that we were just given and really quickly put them down, because Chuck Missler did that once with the first 10 patriarchs.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see if I remember it offhand. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that with his death the despairing shall find rest.
Yes.
If memory served, that's what the patriarchs, from Adam to Noah.
Right. And that's the whole, mission.
That's like, this is the entire plan.
Yeah.
The whole plan of the Bible.
Yeah.
Laid out right there in the meaning.
Right.
So I just, while you were talking, I thought, I've never done it before. I figured, I'll do the names that we just read in chapter 4, Enoch.
Very cool.
Cain is maker or fabricator. That's interesting. Literally a smith. Enoch is dedicated, also teaching. Arad is a wild ass. Mahujel is blot out that Yah is God. Okay, so already they're blotting out that is God right there. Methuselah, they died inquiring. Lamech, why thus with thee, or to bring low, or shall descend. Ada is ornament or be adorned. So she's probably the one that he just reserved for sex, probably.
Sexual, yeah.
Zillah, shadiness, he wasted. She had, although he did have children from both, so that's interesting. But Jabal is stream, and Tubal Cain, thou wilt be brought of Cain. But just looking at the names before we get to the wives, you have a fabricator dedicated a wild ass, blotting out the name of Yah as God. They died inquiring, why thus with thee unto bringing low.
And complete opposite of the seed of promise,
Yeah. Somebody's flipping out on the chat room. This is blasphemous, adding all these meanings and changing scripture with word of mouth. No, it isn't. That's a ridiculous statement. Unless she's talking to somebody else in the chat room. I don't know if she's talking about this or not, but that's a pretty absurd thing. We're just looking at what the text says.
Right, exactly.
And seeing what we can pull out of it. What's in there that can be learned, and that there are meanings in the names,
Absolutely. Yeah. There's, so much meaning behind so much. And that's why I think it's important when people study to look at the Greek and the Hebrew. All right, we'll be right back for second hour. Now Noah had taken a wife of the seed of Cain, and she was a righteous woman. Nevertheless, the curse remained with her seed according to the word of God. And Noah took her on this wise. For the word of the Lord came unto Noah, saying, Take unto thyself Naamah, the daughter of Lamech, who dwelleth here in the city of thy fathers, for she hath been faithful to my gospel. Wherefore I shall preserve through her the seed of Cain through the flood. This Lamech, who was the father of Naamah, was of the seed of Cain, being the son of Methusael, the son of Mehujael, the son of Ired, the son of Enoch, the son of Cain. Lamech had married Ada and Zillah, the daughters of Canaan, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam. Ada bare children unto Lamech, but Zillah was barren until her old age, when the Lord opened her womb, and she conceived and bare a son and a daughter. Her son she named Tubal-Cain, saying, After I had withered away, have I tamed him from the Almighty God. Her daughter she named Naamah, saying, After I had withered away, have I attained pleasure and delight. And while Naamah was yet a child, great consternation fell upon the seed of Cain, for Ired, the son of Enoch, the son of Cain, had become a member of the secret combinations, and was privy to all of its secrets, until one night, when the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Ired, thou hast done evil instead of good, and hast followed after Satan rather than God. Wherefore I shall destroy thee and thine house when I send in the floods upon the earth. But Ired was pricked in his heart, and pled with the Lord to show mercy, and to preserve his seed through the great flood. Seeing that his penitence was true, the Lord said to him, Ired, if thou wilt repent and reveal the secret combination unto the sons of Seth, I will have mercy upon thee, and I will join thy seed unto the seed of Seth, that it may be preserved through the great flood. The writings of Abraham. Just thought I'd add a little bit to the story.
Yeah. So that is saying that Noah's wife was the Naamah of Genesis 4.
Yes, the sister of Tubal-Cain, of the seed of, the seed of Cain.
Because I've had a problem.
The second wife, not the first one. The second wife.
I've had a problem with that, because she would be older than Methuselah when you do the timeline out. Like, she's like 1,070, or I forget what it was. It was quite a bit older than Methuselah for that Naamah. Jasher chapter 5 says that, verse 15, and thou shalt rise up seed and thy children with thee in the midst of the earth. And Noah went and took a wife, and he chose Naamah, the daughter of Enoch.
Yes, the daughter of Enoch, right.
And she was 580 years old. So she was, this Naamah is 100 years younger than Noah, and is of the righteous seed. The other Naamah would be like way older and of the bad seed.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, the breakdown of the, the ages, but I do, I understand that story in Jasher too. And I write and speak about how it's possible that Noah had two wives, named Nama, the first being the daughter of Enoch, as it says in Jasher, because in that particular passage, it speaks about that both Japheth and Shem, that they were the children of that particular marriage, and that they were born of that particular Nama, and that they went in the ways of righteousness after their fathers. And then, but it doesn't make mention of how Ham was, the born from that marriage or a child of that marriage, but that he was actually a product of a different, because I believe that again he was the seed of the serpent after that it was through him, and specifically Canaan, that this particular bloodline was preserved. And again, as far as the ages, I'm not certain of that. I'm just making mention of what the text itself says.
Yeah, if you keep reading in Genesis, not Genesis, I mean Jasher chapter 5, the next verse after the one I just read, it says, Naamah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Japheth, saying, God has enlarged me in the earth. And she conceived again and bare a son, and he called his name Shem, saying, God has made me a remnant to raise up seed in the midst of the earth. And Noah was 502 years old when Naamah bare Shem, and the boys grew up and went in the ways of the Lord in all that Methuselah and Noah their father had taught them. So yes. Ham is not mentioned
right
there, and they're all within a few years of each other in age, so they're pretty close. So I have heard that thesis that perhaps Ham was the product of another union that Noah had. I mean, I don't like making arguments from silence, so it's difficult to take a stand on something like that. But the Naamah of Cain, because I looked that up, I don't have it off the top of my head, but when I did the math out on it, she'd be like way older than Methuselah. So I was like, well, this one of Noah's wife being named Naamah,
right,
however you pronounce it. So the question
which means pleasantness.
Yeah, which one is it? Right. And this one makes the most sense to me chronologically as well as theologically, in terms of what her ancestry would be. Now, the daughters, well, it says that the sons married the offspring of, I think it was Lamech's brother Eliakim, if memory serves. Again, that's in Joshua. I'd have to go look it up again. But what I say is, look, we don't know who he married. And we'll note that none of them made it on the ark. So clearly, there's something up with that family. And Genesis 9:18 and 19 says the whole earth was populated with Noah's sons.
Right.
So that nullifies any idea of, in my mind anyway, of multiple incursions. And when it tells me so and so begat so and so, and when it gets to Canaan's line, and I see these are all the ites that the Israelites are consistently told to utterly destroy, kill the women, kill the children, kill the animals, wipe out everything. I'm going, well, I mean, it tells me who their fathers are, and there's no angels anywhere mentioned here. So, that's where I go with it. Although there's something we need to address, I think, in this that we just read. Let me bring up the Bible on the screen again. And that's the last verse in chapter 4. And to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. And right here, this is where people who believe in the Sethite theory kind of camp out. They'll be like, see, these were the righteous ones, right? The sons of Seth that began to call on the name of the Lord, right? Not actually, no. Unfortunately, that's actually a bad thing, what's going on here. Now, the King James doesn't lead you to believe that. Let me go back to Jasher here. And I'm going to, you mind if I read a few things here?
Oh, no, please do, brother. Yeah. Bring forward anything you like.
Okay. It'll take a few minutes to get through everything here, but
yeah.
Okay. In Joshua chapter 2, beginning in verse 2, and Seth lived 105 years and he begat a son. So again, we got this precedence, and you see this consistently, that they start having children at about 100 years of age. So, maybe there's something to that, in terms of why they're waiting.
Adolescence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's adolescence for somebody who's living 1,000 years or
Right.
900 plus, I guess. And Seth called his name Enosh, saying, because in that time the sons of men began to multiply and to afflict their souls and hearts by transgressing and rebelling against God. And it was in the days of Enosh that the sons of men continued to rebel and transgress against God, to increase the anger of the Lord against the sons of men. And the sons of men went and they served other gods, and they forgot the Lord who had created them in the earth. And in those days, the sons of men made images of brass and iron and wood and stone, and they bowed down and served them. And every man made his god, and they bowed down to them. And the sons of men forsook the Lord in the days of Enosh and his children. And the anger of the Lord was kindled on account of their works and abominations which they did in the earth. And the Lord caused the waters of the river Gihon to overwhelm them. And he destroyed and consumed them. And he destroyed a third part of the earth. And notwithstanding this, the sons of men did not turn from their evil ways, and their hands were yet extended to do evil in the sight of the Lord. And in those days there was neither sowing nor reaping in the earth, and there was no food for the sons of men, and the famine was very great in those days. And the seed which they sowed in those days in the ground became thorns, thistles, and briars. For from the days of Adam was this declaration concerning the earth, of the curse of God, which he cursed the earth on account of the sin which Adam sinned before the Lord. And it was when men continued to rebel and transgress against God and to corrupt their ways that the earth also became corrupted. And Enosh lived 90 years, and he begat Canaan. So one of the big arguments is, the Genesis 6 narrative, whether it's the angels coming down, the sons of God being angels, or the sons of God being the allegedly good sons of Seth. Well, right off the bat, we find out that they're not good sons of Seth.
Right.
Seth may have maintained righteousness. I believe he was a Melchizedek. But by the time you get to Enosh, he's obviously being influenced by, presumably the descendants of Cain, and they're doing the bad thing. And there's a pre-flood flood that consumes a third of the earth. I don't know if that would be a third of the world, earth as in world, or just third of the land surrounding Gihon. When I consider the land of Eden eastward within which the garden was placed, the Mediterranean Sea is a good fit for a third, especially if the rivers that go all the way out to Euphrates, Tigris, and Pishon, going out to the Persian Gulf. That if that geographic if you created a circle with Giza as the center of the circle, extending all the way out to the eastern edge out to Babylon, and just continuing that circle all the way around, then the Mediterranean Sea is a third of that pie chart. So could that have been where Atlantis was? Maybe. I don't know. There's some interesting things that they find there. But I've always been fascinated by the pre-flood flood that talks about there. In my book, Archon Invasion, chapter 1, refuting the Sethite theory, I get into Genesis 4:26. It says, the Septuagint version of it says, and Seth had a son, and he called his name Enosh. He hoped to call on the name of the Lord God. Here Moses takes a moment to give added detail concerning the naming of a child. But what is that text really saying? Enosh's name means mortal. This is unusual. This is an unusual thing to name your kid. Further, according to Jones' Dictionary of Old Testament proper names, Enosh actually means man, frail, and miserable. The website abarim-publications.com gives us more detail and talks about that word right there. People can read if they want to. Continuing, was Seth the appointed one, saying something that alludes to sadness regarding the mortality of men? Was Enosh a sick and frail child? How did the rabbis interpret this particular passage? Clark's commentary on the Bible reveals the traditional understanding of Genesis 4:26. Clark says, then began man to call upon the name of the Lord. The marginal reading is, then began men to call themselves by the name of the Lord, which words are supposed to signify that in the time of Enos, the true followers of God began to distinguish themselves and to be distinguished by others by the appellation of sons of God, those of the other branch of Adam's family among whom the divine worship was not observed, being distinguished by the name children of men. It must not be dissembled that many eminent men have contended that chalal, which we translate as began, should be rendered began profanely, or then profanation began. And from this time, they date the origin of idolatry. Most of the Jewish doctors were of this opinion, and Maimonides has discussed it at some length in his treatise on idolatry, as this piece is curious and gives the most probable account of the origin of and progress of idolatry. I shall insert it here. Now he's quoting Maimonides. It says, "In the days of Enoch, the sons of men erred with great error, and the counsel of the wise men of that age became brutish, and Enoch himself was one of them that erred. And their error was this: they said, for as much as God hath created these stars and spheres to govern the world, and set them on high, and imparted honor unto them, and they are ministers that minister before him, it is meet that men should laud and glorify and give them honor. For this is the will of God, that we magnify and honor whomsoever he magnifieth and honoreth, even as a king would have them honored that stand before him. And this is the honor of the king himself. When this thing was come up into their hearts, they began to build temples unto the stars, and to offer sacrifice unto them, and to laud and glorify them with words, and to worship before them, that they might in their evil opinion obtain favor of the Creator. And this was the root of idolatry, etc. And in process of time there stood up false prophets among the sons of Adam, which said that God had commanded and said unto them, worship such a star, or all the stars, and do sacrifice unto them thus and thus, and build a temple for it, and make an image of it, that all the people, women and children, may worship it. And the false prophet showed them the image which he had feigned out of his own heart, and said it was the image of such a star, which was made known unto him by prophecy. And they began after this manner to make images in temples and under trees and on tops of mountains and hills, and assembled together and worshiped them, etc. And this thing was spread through all the world to serve images with services different from one from another, and to sacrifice unto and worship them. So in process of time, the glorious and fearful name of God was forgotten out of the mouth of all the living and out of their knowledge, and they acknowledged him not. And there was found no people on the earth that knew aught save images of wood and stone, and temples of stone, which they had trained up from their childhood to worship and serve, and to swear by their names. And the wise men that were among them, as the priests and such like, thought there was no God save the stars and spheres, for whose sake and in whose likeness they had made these images. But as for the rock everlasting, there was no man that acknowledged him or knew him save a few persons in the world, as Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, Shem, and Eber. And in this way did the world walk and converse till that pillar of the world, Abraham, our father, was born. That's quoting Maimonides by Clark's commentary on the Bible. Here we see Maimonides, forgive me if I'm butchering his name, a highly respected Jewish philosopher, one that many consider to have been among the greatest Torah scholars of the Middle Ages, elaborating on what the ancient book of Jasher stated. This interpretation is derived from the Hebrew word chalal, Strong's number 2490, which means to profane, wound, defile, break, etc. Thus, Genesis 4:26 may be better rendered as, and Seth had a son and called his name Enos, because man began to profane and defile the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, as opposed to, and to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enoch. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. As King James says, the days of Enoch were not good, but rather rebellious. It is not this is me talking here. It is not my intent to say whether or not Enoch participated in that rebellion himself. That is not the point I'm trying to make here. The point is, this text is usually used to justify the quote-unquote godly line of Seth, which is typically erroneously associated with the sons of God in Genesis 6:4, as opposed to the ungodly line of Cain, which is referred to as the daughters of men in that same passage. Proponents of the Sethite theory will point to Genesis 4:26 and say, see, the sons of Seth are worshiping, calling upon the name of the Lord. Clearly, that is not what was happening here. there. It does not say that the sons of Seth were calling upon the Lord. It says that men began to. But as we've seen above, this calling on the name of the Lord is more of a blasphemy, an act of profaning, rather than an act of worship anyway. Stop there.
Oh yeah, that's all fantastic, and it goes in line with a lot of what is revealed in some of the ancient commentaries. Like, for instance, the Book of Enoch. As you were speaking, I was looking up some of the stuff that is connected to Enoch, and in the Book of Enoch, and also in the Perkti Rabbi Eleazar, and both of them make mention of how Enoch had established the worship of the planets, and that it also describes him setting up a house without virtue and a temple of idol worshiping, and that all these things occurred during that particular time, and that as it makes mention of in even the first book of Adam and Eve and others, that the children of Adam had gone the way of Cain, that they were tempted and they also fell, and they perverted their ways, so that by the time of Noah there was only 8 righteous souls, and even during the time of Enoch that they were warned to not go the way of Cain, because God was going to bring a flood upon the world, and that he was going to punish them, and also the giants and the fallen angels for their incursion and for what they had brought forth as the men of renown who were cannibalizing. And the Book of Enoch goes into great detail of that. Raphael, Michael, they speak about the profundity of this, the severity of the judgment that was brought upon the watchers for all they had brought, with the knowledge and the mysteries of heaven, and delivering them unto specifically the children of Cain, because we see that mentioned in the bloodline are the things that are spoken of as being revealed, the artificers, the iron, the weapon making, things like the roots and the herbs and the astrology and the signs, which again, they started to worship not the Most High God, and not the Word, because there was an understanding, and there was, as spoken about in the Targum and other places, that they revered a Godhead, which included a Holy Trinity, even way back then. But then they fell into darkness, being led astray by Satan into getting involved in idol worship, and then even the whole thing of fertility rites and festivals, and the orgies that were instituted with religion, and then the sacrifice of children and passing them through fire and those kind of things. It wasn't just, the time of Moshe and Leviticus and the pagan cultures. I mean, this goes all the way back to the beginning, the children of Cain led by Satan, and to fall away into, these were things that were established even way back then. And so, I absolutely believe that there is a lot more to that particular passage. Was it chapter 4, verse 26? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and when you look at, again, the ancient commentaries and examine the ancient manuscripts, well, certainly there's a lot of elaboration on, the establishment of the celestials, the planets, the wandering stars, and Enosh's involvement, and how even the sons of Adam, again, led astray. They went in the ways of Cain. But certainly, with regard to Genesis 6, absolutely, we're talking about the angels of God. I mean, that becomes absolutely clear when you examine even like the Book of Jubilees, looking at the Genesis 6, and then the Book of Enoch, and in the Targum, and so many other places. I mean, it's absolute confirmation that we are talking about the angels of God, because 6-fingered, 6-toed, double sets of teeth giants that came as a result of that copulation. Well, having sexual, even corrupted, unholy sex between two humans, you're not going to produce giants as a result of that fornication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kissing cousins don't produce.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the post flood world, Goliath is a runt. Okay, depending on who you read, he's somewhere between 9 and 12 feet tall. Og of Bashan probably somewhere between 13 and 18 feet tall. But the Amorites were as tall as cedar trees. Well, I mean, a modest cedar tree gets to 36 feet tall. The cedars of Lebanon got to 150 feet tall. So when you see what the Hebrew spies said when they came back in Numbers 13, we felt like grasshoppers by comparison. The land is full of people of great stature and the land devours itself. I mean, they give you lots of descriptives to tell you these guys were huge. And there have been numerous excavations of giants recorded throughout history. Interestingly enough, in the United States, I mean, it was a fairly regular newsworthy event that, in newspapers, like well into like the 1920s, even, that they were digging up. The average was probably 8 to 11 feet, 8 to 12 feet tall. But you run into the 20 something footers and the 30 footers every now and then. And I'm sorry, whatever that hormonal disease is that causes people to get tall, like was it Wadlow?
Giantism, yeah.
Giantism, that they have. What was that guy's name? Wadlow something or other.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. He was 8 foot.
Yeah, but I mean, he was frail and had health issues and stuff like that. No, these guys were warriors. The Native Americans talk about giants that grab buffalo on the run.
Ripped off a limb and ate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we'll be right back for a final segment here. The North American Indians believed that the first race of human beings were giants. In the autobiography of William Buffalo Bill Cody, Cody writes that while camping on the South Platte, a Pawnee Indian came into the camp with what the army surgeon pronounced to be a giant thigh bone of a human being. When Cody asked about where such a bone might have come from, the Indian replied that long ago a race of giants had lived in the area. This race of men had been 3 times larger than normal men and able to outrun a buffalo and even carry it in one hand, Cody wrote. Quote, "These giants denied the existence of a great spirit, so he caused a great rainstorm to come and the water kept rising higher and higher so that it drove these proud and conceited giants from the low ground to the hills and thence to the mountains. But at last even the mountain tops were submerged, and then those mammoth men were all drowned. After the flood had subsided, the Great Spirit came to the conclusion that he had made man too large and powerful, and that he would therefore correct the mistake by creating a race of men of smaller size and less strength. This is the reason, say the Indians, that modern men are small and not like the giants of old. They claim that this story is a matter of Indian history, which has been handed down among them from time immemorial." It's interesting that, even with regard to humanity, we see that the children of even up to Noah, that Shem, he lived 600 years, but Noah lived 900 plus years as well. And that all of the previous first 10 generations, they lived this very long lifespan. And I do believe that they were of larger stature, but that the giants were of very much larger stature than even them. And then after the flood, it says in the Book of Enoch that the lifespans of the giants were reduced to 500 years and their stature reduced as well. And then also humanity to what is cited as being 120 years, which Abraham, living 175 years by the time of Moshe, he lived 120 years. And so we see this is also mentioned in the second book of Esdras. But Rob?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Interesting thing, and when I was doing research for Seed, I have one of my characters, Martinez, is introduced as he's running down a really long flight of turquoise colored stairs on the side of a mountain range, and he's being shot at by these people. And without giving too much away, it is believed that this particular location is the burial site of Abel, and the sarcophagus in there is like 14 feet long.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had heard that before, that the pre-flood patriarchs, even the good guys, were significantly bigger than we are, but the giants in the pre-flood world were like crazy huge.
Right.
Enoch talks about them being 3,000 ells.
Right.
And in this edition of Enoch by Dr. A. Nyland, I believe it's Dr. A. Nyland is a female, if I'm not mistaken. Apologize if not, but she says that 3,000 ells is equivalent to 300 cubits, which, if that's true, that's 450 feet.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I always found that intriguing because that's the same dimension as the length of the ark. So it would have been like Noah's Ark would have been a floating casket reminder to the giants that were dying. But, the pre-flood giants were just crazy huge. And the Kabbalah talks about them coming out, just kind of clawing their way out of their mother's wombs, that they were just, beasts.
Right.
I'm of the opinion that they probably grew at the same pace as normal humans did, at least the post-flood giants. Maybe not the pre-flood giants, but the post-flood giants, I'm quite convinced that they grew at the same pace as a normal human. They just don't have a growth inhibitor gene. Like you and I capped out at 5'10", 11, so I'm just shy of 5'11", and I capped out about 16 years of age. There's a gene in me that said, okay, stop. I stopped growing.
Right. Yep.
If you just turn that gene off or remove it, then a person would just keep growing until they die. And so, like you pointed out, in the post-flood era, men's longevity began to drop off significantly too. With some say 120, I would say 200 is probably a better cap. But 120, very few are getting past that after the time of Moses.
Yes.
So even if they are growing at a normal human pace, because this explains why, how could the giants mate with normal humans? Well, they'd have a number of decades probably that they would be within, the right size comparison to a normal woman to be able to copulate with them until they, got to a point where they were too big to, do that. But I do believe there were female giants as well. So there's not much of an issue there. During the break, I looked up, I couldn't remember his name. His name is Robert Wadlow. Robert Wadlow lived from February 22nd. He was born February 22nd, 1918, and died, it looks like 22 years later, July 15th, 1940. It's kind of funny to read this. He got to 8 feet 11 inches, so almost 9 feet tall. It says, was the tallest man to ever walk the earth, at least in recorded history. Not.
Right.
You have the Smithsonian and institutions like that to thank for that entry, because there are plenty of documented accounts, if even fairly recent ones, of bones that are much bigger than that.
Yes.
Being dug up in Ohio and Catalina Island, and stuff found in the Grand Canyon, and all kinds of stuff. Of course, also the stuff that was found by Meriwether Lewis and perhaps Clark as well. That's just here in the Americas. I mean, there's lots of documentation in Europe and elsewhere that very, very big people existed. But I'm of the opinion that they may have gotten as big as 150 feet in the post-flood world. That would be the high end, in my opinion, of what they got to based on Amos. Was it 2:9, I think, where it describes the Amorites as tall as cedar trees going off the cedars of Lebanon. I think probably a more reasonable height was in the 30 to 35, 36 foot range. But as we pointed out in the previous segment, kissing cousins can't do that.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, this was a completely different type of humanoid. and then they were said to be like the demigods, and even the stories of Gilgamesh and how he claimed descent from both angelic as well as earthly, and was seeking after immortality. That all of those stories are written into the Sumerian legend. And it's interesting that in the Book of Giants found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that there is mention of Gilgamesh as being one of the pre-flood giants as well, and that Enoch had counseled and had given warning that they had, asked him to pray on their behalf and to try to gain the favor of the Most High God. But of course, we know that judgment was brought upon them.
Yeah, I found that interesting about in the book of, is it the Book of Giants, or what is it? It's a really small book. I think you sent it to me a while back. It's got a lot of missing pieces to it.
Yeah, the Book of Giants. Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a pre and a post flood Gilgamesh.
Right.
Like so many other names. I mean, it's not just one person named one thing. That many people share names. Like Sargon, there's several Sargons in recorded history. So I wouldn't be surprised, that there may have been a pre-flood and maybe even a pre-flood Og. I don't buy the idea that, I consider it a Jewish fable, frankly, the idea that Og was hanging onto the ark. I know some people, believe that that's how they carried forward over the flood. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but when you read the narrative, it just seems too like, I don't know, Jack and the Beanstalk to me. The Og's hanging on the ark and Noah's feeding him through the window or whatever, whatever. Yeah. He's water skiing behind the ark or something.
No, he's it says that he was on top of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does mention that in the Targum as well as some of the other.
Because he would be quite old if that's the case, because the days of Moses in the Exodus are like 800 plus years after the flood. If memory serves, I'd have to go look it up. Seems like, it was about 800 plus years. So, I mean, this is where I run into some of the issues with some of these things. When you start calculating the ages out, it doesn't seem to work for me. Mm-hmm. Like the Na'amah of Cain versus the Na'amah of Enoch. Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's see. The Exodus. I'm looking at the wall chart of world history. You ever see one of those that fold out?
I'm not. I think I have seen it, but I don't have one. But I am interested in the timeline. So yeah, I should definitely get one of those.
Yeah, it's a good 800 years from Noah to Moses. Oh, and then of course there's the Exodus, and they don't encounter Og until 40 years after, because they wandered in the wilderness. Yeah. So I mean, he'd be like way too old in my opinion, and too small, because he's not that big, by comparison anyway, to the pre-flood giants.
Right. Well, in the book of Jasher, it seems to portray him as very much larger than, what we gain grasp of as far as, in the King James, and also, we make him mention of, in the Lost Book of King Og, it seems to imply that there was a Nimrod, pre-flood Nimrod, as well as a post-flood Nimrod, the Nimrod of the Tower of Babel post-flood, but that there was a Nimrod who was a giant that fought with Og and had wars with them before the flood of Noah's day.
Yeah, it's
leading into the flood of Noah's day. So
I remember reading that and wondering if, I mean, I see where you could say that it's a pre-flood narrative. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at it again. It is very interesting to me. But I've also maintained that Nimrod may not be a name as much as a title.
Right. That's what I believe too. It's a title.
The rebellious one.
Yeah, the rebellious one. Yeah.
Well, we got a little bit of time here. You want to jump into chapter 5?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay. Let's. You didn't have anything else you wanted to say on chapter 4, did you?
No, I think we we covered it pretty in
Okay.
depth.
Well, this is just really a genealogy, and maybe I don't know if we'll have time for it tonight, but maybe on my show next week we can read the Jasher chapter 3 account of Enoch. But
Sounds good. Yeah.
okay, this is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created Adam, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness and after his own image, and he called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he begat Seth, or had begotten Seth, were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters. And all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos. And Seth lived after he begot Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enos lived after he begat Canaan 815 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enos were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. And Canaan lived after he begat Mahalalel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. And the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Mahalalel lived 65 years and begat Jared. And Mahalalel lived after he begat Jared 830 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. And Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. And Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. That's a good place to stop right there.
Yeah. Excellent.
This would be a better place for us, rather than going to Genesis 6, is we'll go ahead and read Jasher 3.
Yes.
And then go into Enoch.
Right. Exactly. And then we can finish up with Genesis
Later.
6 and then move into, that's a good idea. So we'll do, that. Because I think, perfect place for more explanation on Enoch. But I'll read the Targum version here.
Okay.
Because this is fascinating as well. And it goes into a little bit what we were speaking about with Genesis 4. All right. This is the book of the genealogy of man. In the day that the Lord created man, in the likeness of the Lord he made him. Male and female he created them, and blessed them in the name of his word. And he called their name man in the day they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat Sheth, who had the likeness of his image and of his similitude. For before had Hava born Cain, who was not like him, and Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealized in the book of the genealogy of Adam. But afterwards there was one born like him, and he called his name Sheth. And the days of Adam after he begat Sheth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Sheth were 912 years, and he died. And Enosh lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And Enosh lived after he had begotten Canaan 815 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. And Canaan lived 70 years and begat Mahalalel. And Canaan lived after he had begotten Mahalalel 840 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. And Mahalalel lived 65 years and begat Jared. And Mahalalel lived after he had begotten Jared 830 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. And Jared lived 162 years and begat Hanok. And Jared lived after he had begotten Hanok 800 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. And Hanok lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Hanok worshipped in truth before the Lord after he had begotten Methuselah 300 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Hanok with the sojourners of the earth were 365 years. And Hanok served in the truth before the Lord. And behold, he was not with the sojourners of the earth, for he was withdrawn. And he ascended to the firmament by the word before the Lord. And his name was called Metatron, the great Saphira. And I will stop there as well. Because it's interesting that the third book of Enoch speaks about, his that God took him and then also gave him great glory and made him great among the angels, turning him into supposedly Metatron according to that text, and that he was then to be the one that took and wrote all the accounts of the actions and the behaviors and the lives of the sons of men for the books of life, and that he became a scribe of all that had occurred to the children of Adam and the children of Cain here on the earth. But certainly, yeah. And one thing I wanted to point out again really quickly is that in the Targum version of Genesis 5, we see that, the 130 years that Adam separated from his wife was because Enoch had killed Abel, and that Sheth, whose name means compensation, substitution, and replacement.
And Cain had killed Abel.
Yeah, I meant Cain killed Abel, sorry. But yeah, and so Sheth was born in the likeness and the similitude, and this is also found in the King James mention of Seth, that he was in the image and the likeness, the similitude of Adam. But it's interesting that in this particular version, in the Targum, it says that, for before had Hava born Cain, who was not like him, and Abel was killed by his hand. And Cain was cast out, neither is his seed genealogized in the book of the genealogy of Adam, but afterwards there was one born like him. And so we see that these two bloodlines are separated. In Genesis chapter 4, you see that the 10 generations of Cain are listed. And then in Genesis chapter 5 through Seth, who is the replacement, that Seth, it's through Seth, because Abel did not have children, that even in Luke chapter 3, the genealogy of Christ, that we find Cain excluded from that genealogy, and that I believe Christ is the seed of the woman in Genesis 3:15, and that all of that is found within there. And so it again makes mention of how Cain is specifically not of Adam's bloodline or his, part of his blood lineage.
Well, yeah, and along those lines, I would say one of the scriptures that like I've said before, is like, I'll throw as many yabuts out there as I can, based on my understanding, and if somebody can refute my yabuts with scripture, then I'll convert. And one of the ones that you tossed at me a while back that I don't know what else to do with, and I'm going to throw this out for anybody else out there who doubts this, what we're talking about in terms of serpent seed, is in Genesis 4:1, we see that Cain is born first. Right? Cain is born first. Now, if you go to Jude 1:14, okay, this is just King James Bible now. We're not using extra biblical text here. I'm using Bible.cc, so it has lots of different translations, but I'll go to King James. It says right here, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied these things. So, okay, Genesis 4:1 said Cain was the firstborn of Eve. This is saying Enoch is a seventh from Adam. Well, we just read the genealogy in chapter 5. We have Abel, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch. Well, that only works if you start counting from Abel.
Right.
7th from Adam. So 7th from Adam. You got Abel being the first from Adam, Seth second, Enoch third, Canaan fourth, Mahalalel fifth, Jared sixth, 7th from Adam, as Jude 1:14 says. That doesn't work if you think Cain is of Adam, because Enoch would be 8th from Adam.
Right, exactly.
And you can't just say, well, he was not righteous, so we excluded him. Well, that doesn't work. It says 7th from Adam.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and then again, I bring up that whole passage in Jubilees, chapter 4, verse 7, where it says, "And Adam and his wife mourned for Abel 4 weeks of years, and in the 4th year of the 5th week they became joyful, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Seth, for he had said, God hath raised us up a second seed unto us on the earth instead of Abel, for Cain slew him." And so, their Seth is considered their second son. Yeah. And Abel being the first, but murdered by his half-brother Cain, then, it makes sense. And then, again, Cain is excluded from the genealogical records found in Luke chapter 3, also in the Cave of Treasures and the Book of the Bee, which are, very detailed and specific as well.
Yeah,
to consider.
Yeah, we got like 2 minutes left in this broadcast, and I'm just going to affirm your research again. I mean, you've written volumes on this. I've recently picked up a few books from other people on the same subject. But, anybody who doesn't want to go down this path, Zen can make an argument just from the King James Bible without looking at any Targums, without looking at any rabbinic texts, without looking at anything else. He can make a case just from the King James Bible. And the only argument you have, which was the only argument I had, if you don't believe this, is Genesis 4:1. Right. And yet Jude 1:14 refutes that. So either you have a contradiction in the Bible, which I don't believe there are contradictions in the Bible. There's only misunderstandings.
Exactly.
And the whole rest of it testifies that there's another seed line out there, especially in the parables. And when Yeshua is talking about, the different seeds that were sown and whatnot, to me, it answers so many questions. Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
We'll see you on my show next week.
All right, brother. God bless. Thank you, everyone. Good night, all. Shalom.
Good night, everybody.